In the summer of 1518, in the city of Strasbourg, something impossible began. A woman stepped into the street and started to dance. There was no music, no festival, no celebration. She moved in silence, erratic, relentless, as if pulled by something no one else could see. Hours passed. She did not stop. By the next day, her feet were bleeding. By the third, she was still dancing. And then others joined her, one by one. Neighbors, workers, strangers. Within a week, dozens were moving without rest beneath the summer sun. Within a month, hundreds. Some collapsed from exhaustion. Some reportedly died. Authorities did not quarantine the dancers. They did not isolate them. They built a stage. They hired musicians. They believed the only cure was to let them dance it out. This was not a celebration. It was not rebellion. It was not a known disease. It was something far more unsettling. An entire city losing control of its own body. The event would later be known as the Dancing Plague of 1518. But it was not a plague in the way we understand the word. There were no invading armies, no visible pathogen, only movement, compulsive, endless, unwilled. What happened in Strasbourg that summer forces a disturbing question. What if the human body can become the stage where fear, hunger, faith, and desperation perform all at once? And what if, under enough pressure, a society doesn't riot? It dances. The year was 1518. The place was the city of Strasbourg, in the region of Alsace, a cultural and political crossroads between what we now call France and Germany. At the time, Strasbourg belonged to the sprawling and decentralized Holy Roman Empire, a patchwork of territories held together less by unity and more by tradition, negotiation, and fragile authority. This was early modern Europe, not yet industrial, not yet secular, not yet medically rational. Strasbourg was a prosperous trading city by regional standards. Its cathedral towered above narrow streets. Guilds controlled crafts and commerce. Merchants moved goods along the Rhine. On the surface, it functioned. But beneath that surface, strain was accumulating. The early 16th century had been marked by repeated environmental stress. Crop failures in preceding years destabilized food supplies. Grain prices rose sharply, hitting laborers and the urban poor hardest. Bread, the foundation of daily survival, became unpredictable. Malnutrition weakened immune systems. Hunger sharpened tempers. Famine did not need to be constant to be powerful. The memory of it was enough. Disease moved easily through crowded streets. Smallpox, syphilis, dysentery, and various unidentified fevers were common. Medicine offered little certainty. Physicians still operated under humoral theory, the belief that illness resulted from imbalances in blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Treatment meant bloodletting, purging, or prayer. There was no framework for psychological illness as we understand it today. There was no vocabulary for trauma, stress disorders, or psychosomatic response. Religious anxiety amplified everything. Europe in 1518 stood on the edge of rupture. In 1517, Martin Luther had published his 95 Theses, challenging church authority. The Protestant Reformation had not yet fully unfolded, but the tension was already present. Questions of salvation, corruption, divine judgment, and apocalypse circulated widely. In this worldview, suffering was rarely random. If crops failed, it could be punishment. If illness spread, it could be curse. If behavior became strange, it could be possession. One saint loomed particularly large in regional folklore, Saint Vitus. According to popular belief, Saint Vitus could afflict sinners with uncontrollable dancing as divine retribution. This condition, sometimes called Saint Vitus dance, was understood not metaphorically, but physically. People believed a body could be overtaken by sacred force. Add to this the summer heat of 1518. Chroniclers described oppressive warmth. In a city already undernourished and stressed, heat intensifies physiological strain. Dehydration affects cognition. Exhaustion lowers resistance. Strasbourg was also socially rigid. Guild hierarchies limited economic mobility. Wealth inequality was visible and deeply felt. The city council maintained order through regulation, fines, and public authority. Stability was maintained carefully, sometimes forcefully. In such an environment, the population lived in a constant state of low-level pressure. Hunger, fear of illness, fear of divine punishment, economic instability, religious uncertainty, political hierarchy. When the first dancer stepped into the street in July 1518, she did not begin in a peaceful society disrupted by randomness. She began in a city already strained to its limits. History does not erupt from calm. It emerges from pressure. And Strasbourg, in 1518, was ready to break. It began with one woman. Her name, recorded in later accounts, was Frau Trofea. In July of 1518, she stepped into a narrow street in Strasbourg and began to dance. There was no music, no visible trigger. Witnesses described her movements as continuous and uncontrolled, not rhythmic in celebration, but repetitive, almost mechanical. She did not stop. For hours she moved, ignoring pleas from neighbors. By nightfall, she was reportedly still dancing. The following day, she continued. Her feet would have swollen. Muscles would have torn. Dehydration would have set in quickly under the summer heat. Yet she persisted. After several days, others joined her. At first, perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps out of suggestion, perhaps out of fear, but within a week, several dozen people were dancing in the streets. By some contemporary estimates, the number rose to around 100 within weeks, though exact figures remain debated by historians. The important fact is not the number. It is the momentum. The city council took notice. Strasbourg's authorities were not indifferent, they were alarmed. But their understanding of illness was shaped by the medical and religious frameworks of the time. Physicians examined the dancers and reportedly concluded that the affliction was caused by overheated blood. In humoral theory, excessive heat in the body required release. The recommended solution was not restraint. It was continuation. If the body needed to purge heat, then it must keep moving until the imbalance corrected itself. So the authorities did something extraordinary. They institutionalized the dancing. A wooden stage was reportedly constructed. Musicians were hired, drummers and pipers, to provide rhythm. Professional dancers may even have been brought in to guide the afflicted. The logic was simple within their worldview. The cure was controlled expression. If people were compelled to dance, then let them dance properly. But the effect was amplification. Music filled the square, spectacle replaced confusion. What began as an anomaly became a public event. More participants entered the space. Some may have believed they were cursed. Others may have feared becoming cursed if they resisted. In a society saturated with belief in divine punishment, suggestion carried weight. The bodies did not rest. Chroniclers later wrote that some dancers collapsed from exhaustion. Accounts mention strokes, heart failure, and physical collapse, though medieval reporting was imprecise. What is clear is that the condition did not resolve quickly. It persisted for weeks. Authorities eventually shifted strategy. As deaths were rumored and exhaustion became undeniable, the city reversed course. Instead of encouraging dancing, they banned music. They transported some afflicted individuals to a shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus, hoping for divine intervention. Pilgrimage replaced performance. Gradually, the phenomenon subsided. By late summer or early autumn, the dancing faded. No single proclamation ended it. No identifiable medical breakthrough cured it. It simply diminished, as if the pressure that sustained it had dispersed. What makes the episode unsettling is not only that people danced uncontrollably, It is that the institutions of the city, physicians, council members, clergy, misread the crisis in real time. They responded rationally within their framework, and that framework intensified the phenomenon. The dancing plague of 1518 was not chaos without order. It was order acting under flawed assumptions. A society tried to regulate what it did not understand, and in doing so, it helped it spread. Subscribe to the channel. This is where power, history, and technology are examined without comfort. What caused the dancing plague of 1518? For centuries, no single explanation has fully satisfied historians. One early theory points to ergot poisoning. Ergot is a fungus that grows on rye, a staple grain in early modern Europe. When consumed, it can produce convulsions, hallucinations, muscle spasms, and severe physical distress. Because ergot contains compounds chemically related to LSD, some scholars suggested that contaminated bread may have triggered involuntary movements and altered mental states. But there is a problem. Ergot poisoning typically causes intense pain and spasms that make sustained rhythmic movement unlikely. It can paralyze or incapacitate, not produce coordinated dancing for days or weeks. The symptoms do not align cleanly with what was described in Strasbourg. A second explanation is mass psychogenic illness, sometimes called mass hysteria. This occurs when psychological distress manifests physically within a group, spreading through social contagion. In highly stressful environments, fear and suggestion can trigger real bodily symptoms. The historian John Waller argues that this is the most plausible explanation. According to his research, Strasbourg in 1518 was experiencing extreme social stress, famine, disease, religious anxiety, economic inequality. In such conditions, belief systems matter. If people believed that St. Vitus could curse them with uncontrollable dancing, then, under sufficient psychological pressure, the body might comply. Not as performance, not as metaphor, but as lived physical experience. In a deeply religious society, the boundary between spiritual fear and bodily reaction was thin. The dancing, in this view, was not poison. It was expression. A third possibility blends both worlds: biological vulnerability combined with psychological contagion. Malnutrition weakens resilience. Heat stresses the body. Fear shapes perception. Under such strain, one person's breakdown can become many. What makes the event enduringly mysterious is not that explanations exist. It is that none fully eliminate uncertainty. The dancing plague forces us to confront a disturbing possibility. Sometimes, history is not driven by invasion or ideology. Sometimes, it is driven by the fragile line between mind and body. The dancing plague of 1518 matters not because people danced. It matters because of what the dancing reveals about human systems under pressure. Modern audiences often treat the episode as medieval absurdity, a strange anomaly from a superstitious age. But dismissing it that way creates distance that may not exist. Strasbourg was not uniquely irrational. It was structured, governed, economically active, religiously coherent. It functioned, until stress accumulated beyond what its framework could absorb. That is the first reason this event matters. It exposes the limits of institutional interpretation. The city council did not ignore the crisis. Physicians did not shrug. Clergy did not remain silent. Authorities intervened decisively. They built stages. They hired musicians. They organized the phenomenon. They believed they were restoring balance. And yet their response amplified the spread. Institutions do not need cruelty to worsen outcomes. They only need to misdiagnose the nature of the disturbance. When systems respond confidently to the wrong cause, their structure becomes multiplier rather than stabilizer. The second lesson concerns the body as a social instrument. We often draw a boundary between mental and physical illness, as though thought and tissue operate independently. But extreme stress collapses that boundary. The body absorbs environment. It internalizes fear. It expresses tension. Hunger alters chemistry, heat alters cognition, belief alters perception. In Strasbourg, religious culture shaped bodily expectation. If Saint Vitus could curse someone with unstoppable movement, then under intense psychological strain, that narrative became available as explanation and possibly as pathway. The body did not merely malfunction. It performed meaning. The third lesson is contagion without pathogen. Mass psychogenic illness does not require bacteria or toxin. It requires proximity, stress, and shared belief. One person's breakdown becomes visible. Visibility becomes suggestion. Suggestion becomes replication. We prefer to think of ourselves as immune to such processes because we possess scientific vocabulary. But vocabulary does not eliminate vulnerability. Crowds still synchronize emotionally. Markets still panic. Social media accelerates fear faster than any 16th century marketplace ever could. Collective behavior can shift in hours. The difference between 1518 and today is not fragility. It is velocity. Finally, the dancing plague challenges the myth of linear progress. We assume that modernity protects us from episodes that appear irrational. Yet human biology remains unchanged. Stress thresholds remain finite. Institutions still operate within interpretive frameworks that can fail. Strasbourg did not erupt into revolution that summer. It did not descend into open violence. It moved in circles. And that detail is profoundly unsettling, because it suggests that when pressure exceeds capacity, societies do not always explode outward. Sometimes they loop. Sometimes they repeat. Sometimes the crisis manifests not as confrontation, but as compulsion. The dancing plague endures in historical memory because it forces a recognition that stability is conditional. Order depends not only on governance or belief, but on the invisible balance between fear, environment, and interpretation. When that balance fractures, the body may become the stage where the fracture appears. Not metaphorically, physically. And that possibility has never fully disappeared. The dancing plague of 1518 did not end with a declaration. There was no treaty, no medical breakthrough, no official explanation that satisfied everyone. It simply faded. By early autumn, the dancers had slowed. The square returned to routine. Markets reopened. Trade resumed. Life reorganized itself around familiarity. Strasbourg did not collapse. It continued. And yet, the memory lingered. In later centuries, episodes of involuntary movement disorders would sometimes be labeled Saint Vitus, dance. The term evolved medically to describe conditions like chorea, particularly what we now call Sydenham's chorea. But that diagnostic usage was far removed from the summer of 1518. The name survived. The context transformed. The original event drifted into the margins of history. Chroniclers mentioned it. Scholars debated it. Enlightenment thinkers treated it as superstition. 19th century historians saw it as medieval irrationality. 20th century researchers reframed it through psychology and social stress theory. Each era interpreted the plague through its own lens. That is part of its legacy. The event becomes a mirror. It reflects the assumptions of whoever studies it. To a religious worldview, it was divine punishment. To early medicine, it was imbalance of humors. To modern historians, it is mass psychogenic illness. But beneath interpretation lies something constant: collective vulnerability. The dancing plague is not unique in human history. There have been other outbreaks of synchronized fainting, unexplained tremors in schools, laughter epidemics, panic spirals triggered by rumor. They appear in different forms across cultures and centuries. What connects them is pressure, economic strain, religious fear, social instability, environmental stress. When those forces converge, behavior can shift in ways that feel irrational until examined within context. The echo of 1518 is not the dancing itself. It is the reminder that human systems absorb strain quietly for long periods before expressing it visibly. And when expression comes, it may not look like revolution or protest. It may look like repetition, compulsion, synchronization. Strasbourg Square returned to silence. But the question it raised did not. How much pressure can a society carry before it begins to move without choosing to? The dancing plague survives not because it was spectacular, but because it was intimate. It revealed that the boundary between individual body and collective tension is thinner than we prefer to admit. And that insight, 5 centuries later, still unsettles. In 1518, no army invaded Strasbourg. No empire collapsed. No manifesto was written. A woman stepped into the street, and a city followed her. That is what makes the event endure. The dancing plague of 1518 was not an explosion of ideology. It was not conquest. It was not revolution. It was pressure finding a body. For weeks, movement replaced speech. Repetition replaced explanation. Institutions responded, but understanding lagged behind action. And slowly, as quietly as it began, the phenomenon dissolved. History often records wars and rulers, but sometimes the most revealing moments are smaller. A square, a summer, a group of bodies moving without rest. The dancing forces a final question. If stability depends on invisible balances, economic, psychological, cultural, how many societies have come close to moving like that? Not outward in conflict, but inward, in rhythm, in compulsion. Strasbourg returned to normal, but the possibility never disappeared.